Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is day 2 of NAHASDA Essentials Training. Today is January 7th, and today's instructor is Cheryl A. Cosley. Today, I will be your webinar facilitator. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center. A quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. The materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws and treaties. The terms permit you to use the sites for your personal and non-commercial use only. You may print or save copies of the site solely for your personal and non-commercial use. You may not distribute, transfer, transmit, copy, upload, download, post, publish, display, perform, modify, or otherwise create derivatives works from any of the materials without the Seminole Tribe's prior written consent. All right, now to the fun stuff. You can access today's presentation slides available for download, as well as the rest of the webinar materials in the course page. I highly suggest everybody go here. Cheryl has been kind enough to create a whole bunch of documents for you to look at that will help you out today. So please make sure you go and look at those documents under courses. And then how to join a live webinar virtual class. Once you log in, you only have to register once. So I just want to remind everybody, since you're on today, you don't have to register again. You can just log into the platform and click the green bar at the very top of the screen, and it will take you in today's class. Right when you join, it will ask you to select speak or listen only. Please always select listen only to avoid any audio feedback during the webinar. If you wish to change the speaker you are hearing from the webinar, if you wish to change the speaker you are hearing the webinar audio from, click this phone icon. Will bring up a list of your speaker/mic devices so you can select the one you prefer. Some ways you can interact during today's webinar. At the very bottom, and you can at the very bottom, you can go access the chat, and that's where you can interact with Cheryl today. She'll be asking you some poll questions, and that's where you'll be able to answer them, as well as access any of the information and content for today's webinar. Another fun way to interact during the webinar is to click on your name, and then you can click set status, and you'll be able to select how you're feeling. So you can actually say if you're stepping away, you can raise a hand, you can show if you're undecided, confused, sad, happy, applaud, thumbs up, or thumbs down. As we get started, let's introduce ourselves in the chat. Please take a moment and write your first name, where you're joining us from, your work or role in Indian country, and your tribal affiliation. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pass off the mic to Cheryl.
Thank you very
much. That I introduce Cheryl A. Cosley.
Thank you, guys. Welcome back. Two quick things before I get started. If you are watching with somebody else, if there's more than one of you, would you note that in the chat so we know who the other students are for our records? And the second thing is, if you do go over to anywhere to check my materials or anything like that in that red zone, please be advised that it's going to kick you out of the class and bring you straight over there, and then you're going to have to sign back in. Just so you know. And welcome to class, guys. People from Leech Lake. I'm from the Great Lakes region, just so you know. I see Jenna Ban of Choctaw. I get to work with them in the future. I'm very excited. So thank you guys for joining our class. This is day 2. If you should have happened to miss yesterday, I know I've got a student from California in here who missed yesterday. You can watch via YouTube and catch up if you'd like. Okay, so thank you, and I hope you make it the whole week. So my information is at the beginning and the end of the thing. Should you ever need help, I try to always reach out and help my students if they need anything. Just so you know, welcome and good afternoon. In Indian country, we usually start our meetings with a prayer, or I went in and did smudge a little bit ago on our behalf. So hopefully we'll learn some good things today. As for me, my name is Cheryl Cosley. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman. I'm Loon Clan. I come from Kino-Shinkoning in my language, which is Place of the Pike. That's the Bay Mills Indian Reservation. We're located in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan at the very top. Our waters actually border Canada. But I'm coming from Florida because it's freezing there right now. I served as Director of Housing from my tribe for over 28 years. And during that time, I served with the National American Indian Housing Council Board of Directors for 16 years. I started out as secretary, became the vice chair, did that for 12 years. And then I was a 2-term chairwoman. I also served with the Great Lakes Indian Housing Association as their chairperson for 7 years. That's a 31 tribes surrounding the Great Lakes area. And I've been providing training and technical assistance throughout the lower 48 and Alaska for 5 years now. So I'm very, very lucky, blessed, basically, that I've been able to work with and for our people all of this time. So we're going to go till about 3:30. Sometimes I run a couple minutes later. I'm sorry. But today we're going to continue with the eligibility and allowable activities. We're going to hit, throughout the week, Indian Housing Plan, your APR, grant management, program administration, some of those other federal requirements. You saw a few of them yesterday. We have a lot that we have to adhere to. Financial management, conflict of interest. In 2 different places, we have conflict of interest: in the administration of contracts and in admissions. Our required record keeping and reporting, and a little bit about our maintenance, because the maintenance portion is a huge portion of your budget. So you got to have good hands on that. These are the reference materials that you can reach back and grab. Yesterday, we went through the NAHASDA statute. We went through the NAHASDA regulations at CFR Part 1000. So if you ever see 1000 in a number, that's what I'm referring to. And the Uniform Administrative Requirements. Those are the 3 main documents, along with our program guidance and our PIH notices, that you need to know the rules. Those 3 documents, basically, and those additional documents that you can get on Code Talk, will tell you what you can legally do and not do. The programs you can offer, the regulations that you have to follow. It's really, really helpful if you spend some time learning those regulations. Not everything is in one document, so it'll force you from one to the other. But while it does that, you're learning those rules and those requirements. So it's really, really important that you take some time and read the statute and read the regs. The Uniform Administrative Requirements that I talked about yesterday, that's the finance portion. And that is the only document that was not written specifically for housing. So your tribe will use that document also. It covers your procurement, your auditing, your allowable cost, different things like that. So that's where you go for that. So our objectives: to provide that summary of our NAHASDA program, the rules, the key elements. You can't get it all in one crack. It takes a lifetime. I'm still learning, but it keeps you busy anyway. So it'll answer some of our common questions, walk through our grant processes from formula to reporting, and we're going to talk about the key issues in implementing a block grant program. So we're going to continue with eligibility. There's different times. So when you admit a family to your program, when you service them with one NAHASDA dollar, okay, they have to be eligible at that time. You have to keep that proof that they were eligible to receive those federal monies forever. For instance, I think I was probably 8 or 9 years into my job, went through a monitoring and got a finding that we had a family that we could not prove they were income eligible at the time we admitted them. I got the finding. I wasn't the one that admitted them. Okay, so the rule of thumb, or basically the rule, is you keep those initial documents when that family moves in that they were income eligible forever. If they're in there 20 years, you move it from file to file because the file gets this thick. You have to move that initial income over to that new file. Okay, so there's different times. When must a family be low income? If it's rental housing, it's when you sign that lease with the family. That's when they have to become eligible or be eligible. So if they've been sitting on your waiting list for a year, and that happens in a lot of cases, we don't oftentimes have the housing stock to help our members that we need, you have to make sure that they are eligible, recertify them right before you move in. Okay. They might have been eligible when you put them on the list and you checked it then, but you have to check it now, right before you put them in. Home ownership program, when the mortgage is signed with the family. If you're offering rehab services, when that agreement is signed with that family. And for a rental assistance program, when the agreement is signed with the landlord, they have to be income eligible. So what types are we allowed to help? Low income Indian families. That's why Congress gives us the money. That's why we're allowed. It's not discrimination. We're not breaking any laws, but we are supposed to be servicing Native Americans. You can get a finding for putting a non-Native family into your units unless they're law enforcement or essential family. Okay. We are allowed, if you want, and if your governing body wants to utilize what they call the 10% authority, and then you list it as an activity in your IHP. 10% of your grant funds can be utilized to help non-low income families that fall between 80 and 100% of that median income. That's called your 10% authority, and you have to track that so you don't exceed it. Okay. We have essential families. You should have an essential families policy. And there is a provision under the NAHASDA statute for law enforcement officers. Okay, there's certain stipulations that you have to meet to be assisted with that. Okay, we'll get into that. So your eligible Indian families, you can serve any low-income Indian family if they're within your Indian area, and you describe that activity that you're assisting them with and that area in your IHP. Definition again of low income is 80% or less of median income. And when we looked at those, the guidance basically yesterday for the definition of low income, it's the greater of your Indian area or U.S. median income limits. You're gonna compare them. So you're gonna look at your highest county, and then you're gonna compare that to the U.S. median income limit, and you always utilize the higher one so you can make as many or qualify as many of your tribal members as possible. So how many non-low income Indian families? Up to 10% of the grant for families between 80 and 100%. Okay. If it's under 10% and they fall between 80 and 100%, there is no HUD approval required other than your IHP being adopted and you saying that you want to utilize 10% for that authority. Okay. If it's more than 10%, okay, you're tracking it. You've got another family, they're going to come in with $6,000 worth of assistance they're going to need for the year, and you've only got $5,000 left. You're going to contact HUD and ask if you can help that additional family. Okay. So if your family is greater than 100% of median income, you need HUD approval before you help them. Okay. You have to be able to show that they have a housing need that cannot be reasonably be met without your assistance. You should have a moderate income housing policy and a way to do that. Your non-low income families that started out as low income, you can address that in your A&O policy. We're going to continue to help our tribal members that are now over 80% of median income, or we're not. You know, there's some places that say we don't have enough housing stock. There's other programs, you know, let's say we're in Oklahoma and you're in a town where there's, you know, a lot of rental stock. Okay. Doesn't usually happen on a lot of our reservations. You're the only thing in town the majority of the time. But if you are in a place that you offer other programs or there's a lot of other housing stock, those tribes will sometimes make a decision. No, we're only going to serve low income people and that's it. That's a decision you need to have laid out within your A&O policy. Okay. Whether we're going to help them when they come in as low income, but then their income is raised. So you have a decision. Yes, we'll help them, or no, we won't. No, if we don't, give them at least, 90 days to find some other place to go. The other decisions that will have to be made is, are we going to charge them the same amount as we were charging them? Or under the guidance that you can read about in your reference materials, you're allowed to charge them. There's two other calculations that you can use to charge your over income people. One is a fair market value, and there is a formula, a HUD formula you can run. So you have to address that in your A&O policies, whichever you decide that you're going to do, whichever path. So some of the things when you look, and like I said yesterday, your A&O policy is one of your most important policies, okay? Does it address emancipated minors? Do you allow them to apply for housing? Some tribes do, some tribes don't, some just don't address it. Do you address the policy of continuation for services for someone who is no longer an essential family? When I do a lot of policy work, essential families, make sure that you can deem them no longer essential. I'll give you a scenario. You bring somebody in to be a dentist, you deem them an essential family. They love your houses. You got some nice houses that you offer. The tribe next door or near you offers them a different job at a higher wage. They go to that other tribe. Well, they're no longer essential to your families, okay? But they like your housing better, so they want to live there. You can deem them no longer essential and ask them to leave by doing that. So you need to address that in your policy also, that you can deem them no longer essential. Do your policies address continued services if your tenant family is no longer, low income? And that's what we just discussed a little bit ago. So continued occupancy, you can read about that in section 201. You can read about it in the regs at 1110, 1116, and 1147. Okay. So, like I said, you got to learn how to read those regs and the statute. And I used to take pictures of them, okay, this says this, and I would have a stack. Okay, this has to do with continued services, because it sends you from one to the other. Your phone's a great thing. You can always delete it once you have it. So if a rental or home ownership family was low income at the time they entered the program, as described at 1147, they subsequently become low income. The family can continue to participate in the program if you and your recipient's admission and occupancy policies authorize such families to continue to receive assistance. This includes a family member or household member who subsequently takes ownership of a home ownership unit, for instance, by inheriting that home ownership unit. Whether or not a family can receive the same benefits as a low-income family is also subject to your A&O policy. Such families do not count toward your 10% authority, okay, so you don't need to count them there, on the number of non-low-income families that can be served, just so you know that they don't have to be counted. Possible language: families who are initially low income but later experience an increase in income will not be included in our 10% cap on assistance to families at 80% or 80 to 100% of median income that the housing entity serves. And the family will not experience a reduction in assistance provided by the housing entity. Okay, that's saying, yes, we're going to continue to service them and we're not going to charge them more. Remember, your decisions are, will we service them or will we not? Are we going to charge them more or are we going to charge them at that same amount? So you need to make that policy decision if you're going to let them remain there. If you're going to charge them more, and there's a formula in those guidance documents, or you can actually charge them up to the fair market value on their unit. So your essential families. These are all under in your reference materials. The guidance is PIH Notice 2014-02. Okay, that is the guidance that talks about anything to do with over income participants. Okay, tells you how to run the formula, talks about law enforcement, talks about 10% authority, speaks to essential families. So especially your A&O people, you need, that's something that goes in that binder that we talked about yesterday. Okay, so that notice, a non-low income family can receive block grant assistance if you determine as the recipient the presence of that family is essential to your Native or your Alaskan families. Families assisted under this provision can receive the same amount of benefits as a low-income family, as provided at $1,110. They don't count as a non-low-income family for the purpose of your 10% authority, even though HUD approval is not required. So if you deem them essential, okay, one of the things you're going to have to do first of all is who can deem them essential. I, as the executive director, was allowed to do that. I've seen some cases where it's the Board of Commissioners and other cases where only the tribal council can deem someone essential to the community. So that's up to you, but that also needs to be addressed in there. Okay. Once you make that determination, you don't need HUD approval to determine anybody essential, but your policy better reflect why you've done that, you know. Guidance on documenting those determinations is covered further within that notice. To be considered essential, that recipient should first determine that that family is essential to the well-being of your Indian or your Alaskan families residing in your Indian area. Determine that that need for housing cannot reasonably be met without your block grant assistance. That's something that you have to basically document for your essential families and your moderate income families, okay? The criteria, the rationale for determining that essential family is clearly described or should be clearly described within your recipient policy. Documentation has to be maintained that supports that determination. You must make about that determination about every essential family that you assist, even though HUD approval is not required. They're going to check it. Your auditor will check it. HUD will check it during their monitoring. Okay. You can use the guidance in the notice when making that determination. If there is a need for housing for the family that cannot reasonably be met without your block grant assistance. Doesn't require HUD approval. You can serve them if they're essential to the well-being of your families, and the needs cannot be met. Their needs cannot be met without your block grant assistance. You have to include essential families in your A&O policy. Make sure your policies address if you no longer deem them essential. So you should have some form of essential families policy. You know, they determine the presence of the family in the Indian area is essential to the well-being of their Indian families. They demonstrate the family a need for housing that cannot reasonably be met without the assistance. Housing is available to accommodate your essential family in accordance with 2014-02. The housing entity is going to provide a rationale making that determination to at least one of the following criteria. They're in inadequate housing. They lack energy efficiency, overcrowding, poor plumbing, electrical deficiencies, inadequate drain fields, structurally unsound, pest infested. So you have your own means in what you think would help you make that determination. Okay, so you need to develop a policy for that. That's going to be close to your moderate income ones. Some of the requirements. You must meet other policy requirements. Housing has to be available. essential families can include, and you make up your own list. So this one was mine. Medical personnel, dentist, school personnel, public safety officers, Coast Guard and other military personnel, firemen, employees of the tribe, key employees normally, but that's up to your, leadership. Spiritual leaders, preachers, others determined by, in my case, I was allowed to do that as the executive director. Essential families will be requested to leave the program when deemed no longer essential. Make sure that that's in there somewhere, okay? So the NAHASDA statute is what speaks to the provision for assisting your law enforcement officers. It's section 201B. Specifically addresses the provision of housing and housing assistance to a law enforcement officer on an Indian reservation or Indian area, okay? There's criteria that they have to meet. Dog catcher probably wouldn't meet that criteria, okay? They have to be employed full-time by federal, state, county, tribal, or other unit of local government. They have to be sworn to uphold and make arrest for violations of federal, state, county, or tribal law. So they have to be an arresting officer, okay? In addition, the program must determine the presence of that law enforcement officer may deter crime. Law enforcement officers assisted under this provision can receive the same benefits as a low-income family, and they don't count toward the 10% authority, okay? Just so you know that. We very much on my reservation promoted law enforcement, okay? I did an 80-unit project, and you could crack a corner and there'd be a sheriff and their sheriff's car parked here, and you crack the next one and there'd be a state police one, and then there'd be our local, and there'd be the Great Lakes Cliffwick, our fish and wildlife officers. And we also had fair market housing, and we would, a lot of the nearest post was 20 some miles away, but we have some of the nicest housing on our reservation in our area. So they would come out and ask, can we live in your housing? And we would actually, yes, but we'd like to see those cruisers out in clear view. That is a deterrent to crime. Unfortunately, for non-native, or I shouldn't say that, for us, non-native people, criminals are, because of the way our laws sometimes read, our reservations are very safe for people like that. And you don't want that. Our tribal council's always been, first thing they would say is, we are responsible for the health, and welfare of all our tribal communities. Can you tell me why you should live here? That's what would go down when we would run the criminal lien. That's the first thing that they would say. They're responsible for all your tribal members, so you want to make it a place where it's going to deter crime. We, to this day, have never had a gang, things like that. I believe it's because of the allowance of provisions like this, and you can do that. So references 1104, what families are eligible for affordable housing. The following families are eligible: low income. A non-low income family can receive housing in accordance with 1010. A family can receive housing on a reservation or Native Alaskan area if those families' housing needs cannot reasonably be met without such assistance, and the recipient determines the presence of that family on the reservation or Native Alaskan area is essential to the well-being of our Native American or Native Alaskan families. And you can do that using those other provisions, but you have to have those policies in place. So what's HUD going to look at during that HUD monitoring visit? All the program files have to show that that family was low income at the time of admission, or they met the criteria for those other programs. If they are non-low income, they have to have proof the need for housing cannot reasonably be met without the assistance of your block grant funding, or the family meets the definition of an essential family or a law enforcement. And then they're going to look, is there proof that the family meets all the requirements under the approved policies and procedures prior to admission? Okay. And as I said before, keep yourself out of trouble. You move that proof of eligibility at admission from file to file. Always keep it in your most current file. You will have families that are in your program 20 plus years. And those files get pretty thick. And sometimes you make another file. That particular documents, those documents have to go into the new one. Okay. Excuse me. Yesterday. So this is the summary for serving non-low-income families. Essential families need no HUD approval. You do not need to charge them different than you do your low income. It's up to you if you want to. And they don't count against your 10% authority. Okay. Your essential families and your law enforcement are all like that. Okay. Your non-low income families, that 10% authority, they came in, they were low income when they came in, and they aged in place. Okay. That would be one of them. Or that 10% authority you have, don't need HUD approval. You do need to charge them more. Okay, you need to use that one of the two formulas that I talked about in that document, and they do count against your 10% authority. Okay. Secretary approved Indian family over 100%. Remember, if your families are over 100% of median income and they are not law enforcement and they are not essential, you need HUD approval. Okay. So when you look at their income, there's the adjusted annual income. The family's payment is based on a percentage of their income, but their annual income first must be adjusted. So you take how much the family has, their annual income, and then you apply all those standard deductions. That is their adjusted income. That's what they have to be eligible with. Okay. Adjusted income is derived by subtracting any of the 5 deductions or allowances. Now, your governing body can put more in there, but it has to be listed in your IHP also, if you deviate from those standard 5 deductions. Okay. The household's eligibility for deduction depends in part on what type of household it is. You don't always, it depends on the composition of the family. So special rules apply if they're the head of the household, if they're the spouse, if they're the co-head, or they're the sole member. In some cases, they're not allowed that provision if they sit in that position. And in some deductions, you have to be in there. So you have to really understand what those deductions are. So statutory dependent deduction is $480. Okay. Now I have seen cases where tribes will give a larger deduction. If they do that, they need to list it in the IHP. If they give a $750, they'll say we're going to give $480 and an additional amount to cap at $750 for the deduction, and it has to be listed in the IHP. So there's a $480 dependent deduction for all children under the age of 18, all disabled persons over the age of 18, okay, except the head or the co-head of the family. Full-time students over 18 cannot be the head or the co-head. $400 for an elderly or disabled family. Attendant care expenses over 3% of annual income for any type of family. Medical expenses over 3% of annual income for elderly and disabled families only. Okay. So where we have some slippage sometimes, we have people that are new in the A&O department and they don't realize. Okay. For instance, your elderly or disabled deduction. The $400 elderly or disabled deduction, or the other deductions that come with that, are only if it's the head or the co-head or the spouse or sole occupant is 62 years of age or older, or the person with disabilities. So if I'm 50, my husband's 52, and his 70-year-old mother lives with us, we're not an elderly family because the head or the co-head is not elderly. Okay, same scenario, 50 and 55. Our daughter is disabled. We're not a disabled family because she's not the head or the co-head. with the disability. Okay, so you got to make sure that you understand those rules, because other deductions weigh upon what type of a family you have. Okay, so statutory deductions, childcare expenses that enable a family member to work or to go to school. Earned income of minors under 18 does not count. Travel expenses not to exceed 25 per family, not per traveler, per week. So it's 1,300 a year max. Okay, and you need a travel expense, excessive travel expense policy. Other exclusions provided in your local housing policy. So I've went in and I've worked at different places, and I've seen A&O policies that read and say, well, if you collect the excessive travel policy, you're not eligible for childcare. No, that is not true. Those 5 deductions you have to give to everybody. So look at your A&O policies, and if they're not in there, they need to be. Okay. Other exclusions provided in the local housing policies. So those deductions are applicable regardless of which method for calculating annual income is used. So A is yes, B is no, C is I don't know, and I will keep going. If you throw it in the chat, do you offer the child care expense deduction? A is yes, B is no, C is I don't know. Okay. Same thing for, yes, we'll run this one real quick. Yay, Diana. Okay. Good job, Annette. Getting a lot of yeses anyway. That's good. Angela, you got to pick up your A&O policy one of these, like you have a lot of time. Hang on. One of these times when you need something to do. That never happens in housing. You've always got something to do. Come on, a couple more people, so we don't fall behind. Okay. So, same question, travel expense deduction. Do you offer it? Yeah, Andrew, I know. And it takes a while to learn all that stuff, let me tell you. Come on, Annette can't be the only one of you guys that answers. Brianna, Dakota, Denise, Elizabeth, Jill. Yay, Donald. Beach Lake. Fairly new. SAA. Gotcha, Elizabeth. Come on, a couple more. Linda, are you just listening to me in the background? Listen, Linda. How many of you guys heard that one? Okay. Okay. So, your head of the family, the spouse, the co-head can never qualify as a dependent. So they can never get a dependent deduction, which means they can also never be considered the dependent as a college student, a full-time student. Okay. A foster child, an unborn child, a child that has not yet joined the family, or a live-in attendant may never be counted as a dependent. Okay. Skip one. There we go. Those in the household who are under the age of 18 can qualify as a dependent, or a full-time student over the age of 18, as long as they're not the head, co-head, or sole occupant. So those are the rules for full-time student. And it's interesting. They get a $480 statutory deduction. If they're working, you're going to take that $480 back. Okay. So you just count the first $480 they make, then they could make $50,000 and you don't count it. Okay. That $480 limit does not apply if they're the head, the co-head, or the sole occupant, though. You got to remember that. Adult students living away from home, or an adult, period, any other adult in the household, if you count them as a member of the household when you're determining that household size and how much income that they can have, if they're counted in there, you have to, the first 480 again would count as income. That 480 limit does not apply if it's the head, the co-head, sole occupant, then you got to count everything that they make. You should always, well, not you should always, but normally an adult student would need to be verified as a dependent, usually on a parent's tax return, and student status verified with documentation in the file, with like a full-time student verification form. Okay, but I will give you a scenario, which you probably will come across. I'm not in HUD assisted housing. I have my own mortgage on the reservation. Took my son, he started working, I think the day after he turned 15 or 16, worked full-time ever since. Probably by the time he was 17 or 18, he knew that he got more money back in taxes if he filed by himself. So he did. So you will see times when they are not on their parents' tax forms because the children just realize that they'll make more money the other way, and that's the way that they've always started to do that. So it depends. So childcare expenses. This is my great niece and nephew at Halloween, boy and a girl, as you can see. Childcare expenses will enable a family member to be gainfully employed or further their education. The amount deducted should not exceed their employment income. Okay, so if they make $800 selling fry bread at the tribal office, they cannot deduct $900 for childcare. Okay, it cannot exceed the employment income that they are clarifying or claiming. The amount is not paid or reimbursed. It's a deduction. Child care expenses incurred to permit a family member to work can't exceed the amount earned by the family member made available to work during the hours when child care is paid. Okay. And it should also match up. They shouldn't be paying for child care from 7 to 11 at night when they work from 10 to noon in their business. Okay. Child care verification form. Now, when this sometimes will create a problem is when they ask for that to be filled out and it's another tenant that you have who's not counting that income. That happens. You'll see it at one point or another. So your excessive travel expenses, you should have a policy and a form. Okay. The allowance for the benefit of families who travel long distances, you decide, or your governing body decides what a long distance is. Okay. So depending on where you were on our reservation, the nearest town where we went for groceries, there was a college, but we have a community college. They weren't employed by the tribe or one of our casinos. The employment was in town. That's where I used to work before I started as the housing director. Depending on where you are on the reservation, it was 20 to 25 miles distance. So we considered excessive travel 20 miles or more one way. Okay, that's what our policy. You can require Google Maps from the place of employment or the place of education to their home address, but make sure you have a policy for it. It's per traveler, not per family. I said that wrong. Per family, not per traveler, excuse me, $1,300 a year total. Okay, make sure you have that criteria in your policy. What it does help, I've seen, is traveling nurses. I've seen a couple of places where they said, wow, that might, actually really, really help them. So when you go to calculate that maximum payment, it's your annual income minus those statutory deductions. That is their annual adjusted income. You then take that annual adjusted income and you divide it by the 12 months in the year. That's their monthly adjusted income. You take the monthly adjusted income, you multiply that times 30%. That is the most you can charge your family if they're low income. Okay. That's why 30% of zero is zero. You always have to run that calculation. Okay. What if they are reimbursed by their employer for the mileage or per diem for travel? Well, then you would put that in your policy. This cannot be utilized if your employer reimburses the mileage or per diem. That's what you would do there. Okay. Oops. So the deduction based on the type of household. An elderly or a disabled household. So the head, the co-head, or the sole occupant is either an elder, okay, or they're disabled. They qualify for everything. Every deduction they qualify for. If the family is not elder or disabled, they're qualified for dependent deductions, childcare to enable them to work or go to school. They don't qualify for medical expenses in excess of 3%. That is only to be applied to elder or disabled families, households. They qualify for attendant care, and they qualify for travel expenses. So it always depends on what type of family you are looking at. Now, one of the things you need to address in your E&O policy is at what point are you going to call them an elder? Are you going to use a different definition than that are in the regs? A lot of our families have near elders. I've heard them called baby elders, all sorts of different things. Some tribes say 55, okay? If you're going to give them or consider them elderly at that age, and it differs from that in the regulation, you need to address that in your policy and your IHP, okay? Oops.
Cheryl, there is a question. Do you want me to go ahead and read it out to you, or did you want it at the end?
I already answered it.
Oh, okay.
That's why she thanked me. No worries, honey. Okay, so your housing need for your non-low income families. They have to, first of all, have a housing need that cannot be otherwise met without your block grant assistance, okay? By using a form that sort of similar to what I showed you before. The family resides in inadequate housing, temporary housing, they're homeless. When the family pays more than 50% of their income for housing, including utilities. And there's examples in that guidance, even though it's old. There's good guidance, things that can help you create your policy if you don't have it. How many non-low income families, up to 10% of your grant for 80 to 100% of median income, if you list that in your IHP. If it's more than 10%, you need that HUD approval. If their income is over 100% of median income, you need that HUD approval, okay? And you need to address your non-low income family in housing that was assisted, when they were low income when they came in, but they are no longer low income. You need to address that there. So obtaining HUD approval, you submit a proposal to provide assistance to your non-low income families as part of your Indian housing plan. You request the proposal as an amendment. So you can amend your IHP at any time, just so you know that. You submit that request to HUD. So that's the guidance, providing assistance to non-low income Indian families under NAHASDA. That's PIH 2014-02. It's in the reference materials, or you can actually get on Code Talk, and then you go back to 2014, or you Google it on that line like I taught you yesterday, put non-low income families, and it'll pop up. Okay, so some of the examples of required documentation: property inspections, evidence of living in temporary housing, verification of that family's income, rejection letters from lenders or landlords or different service agencies, letters stating the family doesn't qualify for other federal, state, or local housing programs, or that they're full and have, 2-year waiting list. So you need to have a policy for your moderate income, just like you do an essential family. Okay. If you look at this one, some tribes will put the family desires a residence on the reservation or the village or the pueblo or the rancheria, whatever circumstance that you have. They want to live with our people. That can be a reason. You build your own reasoning within your policy. Okay. They're temporary. They're living with relatives. They're in hotels, motels. They're in a transitional shelter. They're homeless. They have inaccessibility to financing. What kind of documentation? Well, it could be, check stubs, rent receipts, rejection letters, family size, unit size, code violation letters from the town, so all of that. So your non-low income rental payment requirements. So when they are not low income and they are not law enforcement or essential, you need to charge them differently than you charge our low income tenants. The rents, including homebuyer payments under a lease purchase agreement, for instance, to be paid to a non-low income family cannot be less than the income of a family at 80% or lower of median income, multiplied times the rental payment of a family at 80% of median income. But it need not exceed the fair market rent or value of the unit. Okay. You never need to charge them more than fair market, but you need to run one of the two calculations. Okay. So the scenario, 80% of the median income for a family of 4 in Seattle, $75,040. The rent for a family at 80% of median income is $1,200 a month. The fair market in that area is $1,793. Okay. So you can see where a lot of times the fair market is higher than if you run the calculation. And it will tell you how to run the calculation on that form. This is the easiest way for me to do it. The income of a non-low income family is $88,000 divided by the income of a low income family at $75,040 multiplied times the low income rent. Okay. That's 1.17 equals the rent of your non-low income family. So it will be the rent at 80% is $1,200 or $1,404. Okay. That's if you ran the formula. That's what it comes out to, is $1,404, or the fair market rent, which is $1,793. Income of your non-low income family, 88,000 divided by the income of your low income family, $75,040. Okay. Multiplied times the low income rent. The rent is at 80% of $1,200. So that 1.17 times the rent at 80% of $1,200. It's either going to be $1,404 or $1,793, which is the fair market. So the fair market's usually always more than the calculation, but you're going to have to decide what you're going to use, and you do it consistently you can do it differently for different programs, but within the program themselves, we're going to either use the fair market value or we're going to use the calculation, and you specify that in your rules. So you calculate that rental payment, divide their income by 80% of median income, multiply that by the amount of the monthly rent for a low income family. That amount is your minimum monthly payment. Got to address that in your policy. Okay. Then somebody has to calculate that 10% authority. So in this scenario, it's a small housing authority. They get $365,000 a year. 10% of $365,000 is $36,500. Okay, so that's all they have to utilize to help their families. The first family they help, using the fair market rent of $698 as the rental value. 698, 12 months in a year, 8,376 of NAHASDA assistance that they're going to utilize out of that 10% authority. Then they have a second family with a home ownership assistance. They're helping them with $850 a month times 12. That's $10,200. Third family comes in, they're assisting, and they're giving them down payment assistance. The amount of assistance for that family is $7,400. So with 3 families in that program, comes out to $25,976. It leaves them $10,524 of that authority for eligible use. If the next family that comes in is $11,000, they're going to have to contact HUD and tell them, yeah, we're, a little 400 and some short to help this family. May we help them? You ask for permission and they'll either give you a yay or a nay to help that next family. You have to keep that within your authority though, and track that. And they'll come in and look, let me see how much you're utilizing, so. Your other program assistance for your non-low income families, again, the rent including homebuyer payments under a purchase agreement to be paid by a non-low income family can't be less than that of your non-low income families at 80% of median income. Okay. Other assistance, including down payment assistance, and that's where we have a lot of slippage in Indian country. We just run a program and either fail to make sure that they're income eligible, or we, have a max. Let's say we're giving them $6,000 worth of assistance. They don't run the calculation, and you'll get a finding there because they can't receive the same amount of money. Or the other area, and we'll learn about this over the next couple of days, you're not collecting the insurance or making sure that there is insurance in place. The insurance requirement is if you assist them with over $5,000, they have to have insurance in place. And then we have useful life requirements that kick in. So we have a lot of slippage with our programs, especially down payment assistance and rehab in those areas. Okay, so pay particular attention over the next couple of days to make sure that you guys aren't inadvertently doing that. So other assistance, including down payment assistance to non-low income families, can't exceed, your income of your family at 80% of median income divided by the income of your non-low income families, multiplied time the present value of the assistance provided to a family who is at 80% or less. So again, your family's at $75,040. The down payment in this example is capped at $10,000. Okay, for your families that are 80% or under. So if you're 80% or under, they'll qualify to up to $10,000. So you take the income of your low income family divided by the income of your non-low income family, multiplied times that capped assistance at $10,000. That equals your max assistance for your non-low income family. So in this case, your income of your low income family is $75,040 divided by the $88,000 of your non-low income family. That comes out to 0.85. Multiply that 0.85 to the max amount of assistance at $10,000. This non-low income family would only be eligible for $8,500, not $10,000 for down payment assistance. That's where we have a lot of slippage. Okay, so become familiar with that and all of the things that come into play if you offer these programs, and they're over income. And if you're helping them with over $5,000, your insurance is going to kick in and your useful life requirements are going to kick in. Okay, a disabled tenant, Dakota. First of all, you're going to look under all of your provisions for disabled, and then they're going to be treated by income, not by disability. Okay, So that's how you're going to look at that. Your insurance requirements do apply to anything that you provide assistance with, okay? Donald, I believe those are also in the reference materials, but we will be talking about that. It's basically when you provide assistance of $5,000 or more, the insurance requirements definitely kick in. So homeownership, yes, especially for rehab programs and down payment assistance and things like that, okay? And that's why I said we have a lot of slippage and findings in that area. So what is HUD going to check when they come in during the monitoring visit? If the participant is non-low income, are they paying the appropriate rate up to fair market? And you can read about that part of the requirements in that reference material. Okay. So this next section is your waiting list, your application and your waiting list. HUD is very particular about your waiting list. Okay. Your forms, first of all, should capture your family's characteristics, their estimated, anticipated income, what size family, in some cases, location. Okay, if you are in like 7 counties, which location do they want to be placed? And what type of home? Do they want a rental? Do they want a home ownership? What are they asking for? So your application needs to whittle all that down so you can see that. Whether the family is suitable for participation in your housing program in accordance with your local selection criteria. Whether that applicant can qualify for a preference. NAHASDA allows us to put preferences in place for our applicants and our programs. So a written application should be time and date stamped when you receive it, okay? It should be accepted and processed to determine eligibility. The staff should document all communication with an applicant and definitely removal for a list. You'll get a finding. They're going to look to see, have you removed anybody from your waiting list and why? Okay. You have certain steps that you should take whenever you take somebody off of a waiting list. Okay. And your staff should help applicants complete an application. You know, you could have people that English is not their first language, functional illiterate, somebody that quit school at a very young age because they had to work. I have had to help in the past our tenants fill out applications. It just happens. Have a private area to do that. Excuse my French, do not use your bougie people to serve in that function. This should be a down-to-earth person that can do that in private and can help them. You know, there's certain things that we're working with very, very sensitive materials, and we're there to help them. That is why we are in those positions. You know, you should never look down on a person unless you're reaching down to help them up. Okay. Make sure that the person that does these type of functions is good with people. Okay. Your selection policies, the regulations require you to develop a selection policy. Your housing entity can establish preferences. Members of your tribe, persons with special needs, veterans, certain types of families. If you're building an elder complex, your preference is going to be elders, you know, first-time home buyers, perhaps, you know, with the down payment assistance. You set your preferences also dependent on what type of product that you're offering, okay? Your leases, rental and home buyer leases have to be in writing. Always, always, if you do anything to a lease, involve your legal staff, okay? It has to state the rent or the lease payment, any type of admin fee, who's responsible for what maintenance, the timeline. What is a timeline for adequate notice? If I'm going to come in and inspect your unit, unless it's an emergency and the place is on fire or we think we have a gas leak, you know, you give them a certain amount of time before you're allowed to go in there. Those inspection requirements. Reasons for terminating that lease. They're all spelled out within those documents. Your application package for all the programs, okay? And you should have different rules and regulations and packages for every type of program that you offer, because sometimes the rules for this one won't apply to this one. And when you try to put them all in one document, it can become confusing even to your staff, let alone your members, okay? So your application package for every program that you offer should ask about the applicant's relationship with your decision makers. This is for the conflict of interest in admissions requirements, okay? The name of the applicant, what program they're applying for, what the date on the application is. I'm applying for this housing program noted above. I am disclosing that I am an employee of the housing entity, or I'm a board of commissioner, or I'm a tribal council member. I'm an immediate family member to a housing employee, a board of commissioner, tribal council member. And it actually extends into business partners, okay? I'm a business partner of a housing employee, a board of commissioner, or a tribal council member, or I am neither to all of the above, okay? If you are a family member or a business partner of a housing employee, board of commissioner, or tribal council, please state the name of your relation and your relationship to them. So your name and your relationship. And then there's an acknowledgement under there. I understand that public disclosure of my selection will be made, that a copy of this disclosure shall be submitted to HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development. I have been notified of my opportunity to receive a copy of the conflict of interest policy and or to receive additional information from the housing entity. And I understand that this disclosure does not disqualify and or determine my application ineligible. So this is one thing that should be in all of your packages, because you need that to adhere to our conflict of interest provisions. So eligibility screening, do you run criminal backgrounds? Do you get landlord references? Do you check on creditworthiness, outstanding debt? It's going to depend on what type of program. You might not be checking on that for your rental program, but if it's a home ownership, you're going to want to know about that. Program specific requirements, the family compositions, the tribal enrollment, conflict of interest, that relationship to your decision makers, their creditworthiness. Is it their principal residence? That should be, you need to speak to that in your A&O policy. Ability to enter into an agreement. What's their maintenance history? Have they trashed 20 units before? Are you going to let them do it again? Verification time frame. Employment stability, depending on what program they're going into. Waiting list. Those establish the order of the assistance to your qualified applicants. It implements your preferences and priorities that your governing body has picked. It ensures fair and equitable treatment. That is what they look at. HUD's going to look at that every time they come in. Are you treating all your tribal members the same? Okay. Serves as a source of data about need and demand for units by size, the type, and the location. So your options. The number of waiting list, what to include on that waiting list. Is it going to be electronic? How are they going to join it? How are you going to purge it? You don't remove people from a waiting list without a policy. You always keep as an inactive application, okay? You should have an inactive application file. They go from one to the other, but they can't just be shredded. You've got to be able to prove when they got moved, who moved them, should be signed, why they went over to that file, okay? Signature, reason, date of staff member that removed that application. HUD's going to look for that. Keep clicking too fast. So your verification form should capture the name, the position, the telephone number, and the email of anybody that you get information from, that provider. They should capture their current and anticipated earnings, fluctuating pay rates, and hours. You might want to consider including self-addressed stamped envelopes with anything that you mail out. HUD doesn't like the tenants, and I think this comes from public housing, okay? They don't like them hand carrying their own information. So some of those standard verification forms: consent and release of information, verification of employment, income, trust income, savings, pension, and landlord verifications. Authorizations for release of information, that HUD form 9886. All adult family members and spouse, have to sign, or co-heads. Can be used between regular and re-exams to verify unreported income. The applicant's certification that income and other information is accurate and complete. You should also note somewhere on there that they allow a copy of that. It doesn't have to be the original form. And, I was this many years old when I learned this. I don't know how long I was in there. That form is only valid for 15 months. Okay. So when they come in, you should always be getting that form re-signed. And it's only used for the verification forms or verification sources listed on the form. So make sure everybody that you check is on the front of that form. Okay. There we go. So your release forms obtaining information for verification purposes requires a signed consent release of information from the family member whose information is being requested. You should also, if you're in the A&O department, be tracking when the family members become 18, because you're going to have them come in and sign those forms. You're collecting participant information. All participant information is considered protected, personally identifiable information, and it's required to be kept confidential. Okay. Nobody has the right to go in and just look at your tenant forms. We recommend that you have your board of commissioners, your tribal council, your staff members sign a policy such as this. Whereas the Housing Authority provides decent, safe, sanitary housing to low-income Native households in accordance with HUD guidelines, the Housing Authority seeks to protect the interest of the residents and applicants by prohibiting the exposure, the use of personal information to the extent permitted by tribal and state law. The Housing Authority is also mandated by HUD confidentiality requirements to protect the tenant information. The Housing Authority records. In all cases, the release of Housing Authority records requires the prior written approval of your ED. Therefore, be it resolved that the policy of the Housing Authority is to protect the interests of the people we serve to the maximum extent permitted by law. All employees, members of the authority, including the housing commissioners and tribal council, are required to abide by this standard. Only inspectors, auditors, investigators, and others who are engaged in normal functions as approved by HUD may have access to confidential information concerning our residents and applicants. Okay. They just can't come in because they're on the board and go through a tenant file. It's not their business. Okay. That's confidential information. Say your National Crime Information Center, that's up to you. We have the ability to run a criminal lien on any applicant, okay, and any person that wishes to be on the staff of your housing entity, okay. They have access to a lot of confidential information, personal information, access to households. You should always run a criminal lien on anybody working within the housing entity. Your maintenance staff, because they go into those houses, with children in them. Your staff has, access to all the personal information about your families. Make sure that, you utilize it for something like that. So your criminal history records can be used for purposes of applicant screening, lease enforcement, and eviction. Purposes of the guidance, the term tenants includes home buyers, okay, applying for, currently being assisted under NAHASDA. Recipients should have specific tenant selection policies implemented fairly and consistently. The recipient can wish to have a policy that restricts or forbids occupancy to tenants or potential tenants and homebuyers who have a criminal conviction of any kind or specific types of criminal convictions. For prospective tenants or housing assisted with block grant funds, recipients can obtain criminal history to aid in the applicant screening, lease enforcement, and eviction. In this case, tenants include homebuyers who are purchasing their homes through lease purchase agreements with the recipient and homeowners seeking housing assistance. Okay. So you can receive criminal conviction information on applicants for employment and or on adult applicants for housing assistance and tenants through Section 208 of the NAHASDA statute. Okay. It's the National Crime Information Center, police departments, law enforcements. For purposes of this section, the term tenants include home buyers who are purchasing a home. So you have the right to all of that information. How are you to use the criminal conviction information? With regard to adult tenants and applicants, the recipient shall use the conviction information described at 1150 for applicant screening, lease enforcement, and eviction actions. With regards to applicants for employment, the recipient shall use the conviction information described at 150 for the purposes set out in Section 208 of NAHASDA. That information has to be disclosed only to any person who has a job-related need for the information, who is an authorized officer, employee, or representative of the recipient, or the owner of the NAHASDA or the housing assisted under NAHASDA. We would attach their application to every form, because at one time we used to have to go through a state police audit when we did that. It's an intense process. You should have it really well built out. I don't have the time to devote to that right now, but you should be running your criminal liens. Okay. That information has to be kept confidentially. There's certain steps. It's got to be stored in a separate file under lock and key of your executive director and one other person. That one other person should be actually entered into the record or your meeting minutes saying that designee, this person is the designee of these forms as well as the executive director. So mine wasn't even my assistant director. Mine was one of the most closed-lip persons that I had on my staff. Okay, so it's not necessarily your top two in that layer, but those are the only two that have access to those forms. We never even would let the applicant see that. We just didn't hand them over that information. And when the tribe or the council or the board of commissioners sees it, it would be in a redacted form also. Okay. It's much longer than I have in the next 20 minutes to show you how to go through that, but you can always ask for help on how to do that. Okay. But you should be doing that. So you need to establish a system of records management that ensures any criminal record received is maintained confidentially, not misused or improperly disseminated. I would have that applicant's a copy right on the back of it to give us proof to even run it. You don't just do it because, hey, my daughter's got a new boyfriend. Let's see what kind of history he's got. That's not allowable. It has to be able to trace right back to them applying for housing. Okay. It has to be destroyed once you've either put them in or you've told them they weren't eligible. The grievance period has expired and things like that. And you're going to make a note on there that, yes, we've ran a criminal lien on this date, they passed it or they didn't pass it. And then those have to be shredded. So the conviction records have to be kept under lock and key under the custody of the executive director or their designee. Okay. They should be retained separately not within that same file. Your drug records will be the same way. We didn't used to have things like that in our files, but now a lot of our tribes will have healing to wellness courts. And we'll sometimes have other sensitive information in there that used to not be in our files. Okay. And remember, they have to be destroyed once that use is done. You can keep the conviction record information from your law enforcement agencies in files separate from all other housing records under the lock and key, under the custody of your executive director or designee for such records. They can only be accessed with the written permission of the executive director or the designee for the purposes stated in Section 208 of NAHASDA and the regulations. Policy and your meeting minutes should reflect who that designee is. Okay. Drug abuse treatment information, you need to also do the same thing. Same protocols, establish that system of records management that ensures any information that you receive from a drug abuse treatment facility is maintained, properly, not misused, not improperly disseminated, destroyed once the purpose for which that record was requested. Records should never be retained in the applicant or tenant file. They have to be retained separately and securely. Okay, so we got through there. We have allowable activities and not much time. So you have to make sure that what you're doing is an eligible activity. Now, NAHASDA sets out a wide range of affordable housing activities that you can undertake with your block grant funds. The activities range from construction of units to housing services. It's important recipients become familiar with the NAHASDA statute. So guys, pick that up and read it. While the statute sets out the range of possible activities, you as a recipient determine what activities you're going to undertake. Based upon the needs and the interest of the tribe, you as the recipient will determine what kind of programs you're going to offer. There is no requirement under NAHASDA that you undertake any particular type of program, except that you ensure, we talked about yesterday, that current assisted stock, the stuff built before 1996, that you receive the subsidy on. Okay, so that 1937 housing stock, you have to maintain that. You state in your planned activities, in your housing plan, what you're going to do in a particular year. Your activities have to be related to affordable housing. Okay. There's a wide range of housing types and ownership possible. Okay. You have to also adhere to total development cost. Okay. I did not correct this slide. The one that is in your reference material is from 2024. It is the current one. Okay, so this one's been updated. Your total development cost, you have to build within a certain cost. Okay, it's in your reference materials. Make sure that you do that. One of the most common questions is, can we work on privately owned units? Activities can be undertaken on private units as long as the activity is eligible and your housing occupants are low income. Your block grant funds, therefore, can be used to rehabilitate a privately owned home of a low income family or to assist a low income family by a private unit. The term housing can cover a wide range of unit types, including rental housing. Okay, it could be single family, multifamily, single family occupancy, attached units, duplexes, triplexes, home ownership units. Got to remember again that useful life and binding commitment rules that will apply and the insurance requirements. And we'll get into that later on this week. You can offer various types of programs to your tribal members, such as group homes if you wanted to, for people with special needs, for the elderly, person with disabilities. You can do congregate housing, transitional housing, units designed to help people move from welfare to self-sufficiency. Typically, those units have a specified maximum occupancy time frame, up to 2 years, things like that. You set those parameters also. Halfway housing, housing for persons, if you wanted to, leaving prisons or mental health facilities, you could build domestic violence shelters, emergency homeless shelters. It is up to your tribe, your governing body, to decide what kind of program you are going to offer. The types of eligible activities: you can do development, you can do housing assistance, you can offer housing services, housing management services, crime prevention and safety, model activities, and we have administrative and planning expenses that were allowed. So under Indian Housing Assistance, that provision of modernization or operating assistance for housing previously developed or operated pursuant to a contract between HUD and IHA. So those would refer to those CAS units, that Section 202, that 1937 Housing Act that we talked about yesterday, for modernization, operating, maintenance, rent, utility subsidies were offered with those programs. Development under 2022, acquisition of new construction, reconstruction, moderate, substantial rehab, affordable housing, which can actually include real property acquisition, site improvement, development, rehab of utilities, infrastructure if you need it, utility services. You can do conversion, demolition of a unit, financing of a unit, your administration, your planning, improvement, things to help achieve energy efficiency. You can do mold remediation and any other, related activity. Your overall program and administrative management is dependent upon, your money, how much A&P funds you can actually expend. You can utilize those for monitoring and evaluation. If you need help with that IHP or the APR prep, you can utilize those funds for those. If you don't put your IHP out in time, you can lose your money for a year. So it's really important that you track when those are due, okay? If you want to challenge your formula, that is an eligible expense under admin and planning cost. So as I said, dependent upon how much money you receive, that is what your A&P costs are limited to. 20% of your grant if you receive $500,000 or more. If you receive $500,000 or less, you can utilize up to 30%. HUD can approve a higher percentage, okay? So under 202, housing services is the provision for services related to affordable housing, which could be, but not limited to, housing counseling, for your rental and homeownership assistance, homelessness prevention activities, security deposit, first month's rent to permit a family to move into an apartment, youth activities, youth sports, drug abuse education, boys and girls club, other services related to assisting your homeowners, tenants, contractors, entities to participate in your programs, payments for foreclosure prevention, energy auditing, self-sufficiency activities, childcare for your residents, job placement, training for residents, tenant-based rental assistance programs, including for, college assistants or college students, and establishment and support of resident organizations or resident management corporations. So some of the housing services: home fairs, home buyer education, financial literacy, elderly services. I keep clicking too. And under management, section 2024 allows for tenant-based rental assistance, tenant selection, mediation, inspections, prep work, specs, and inspections, and loan processing. Your housing management under NAHASDA: property management, staffing, operations, maintenance, and inspection, admissions and occupancy work, staffing, application intake, occupancy, documentation. Under crime prevention and safety, which is 2025, you can do physical improvements, you can do speed bumps, fencing, bus shelters, you can put cages upon your security lights, you can put security lights out. Employment of police or security personnel. You cannot employ and pay for 100% of a police officer's salary, because it has to be directly related to helping your tenants only. Okay, there's specific rules when it gets to that, but you can help with that. And equipment for security personnel, your provision of safety, security, law enforcement measures, activities appropriate, anything, to protect the residents of your affordable housing from crime. It covers a range of activities related to safety, security, law enforcement, those measures and activities to protect your residents from that crime. And then we're allowed to do what they call model activities, which you have to get approved under Section 2026. Housing activities to carry out the purposes of NAHASDA have to be approved by HUD. 60 days they have to approve that activity. You submit it as part of an IHP, or you can do that IHP amendment at any time. Has to be for affordable housing activities. So model activities can be assistance in excess of that 10% for your moderate income families, or it can be housing office space, warehouse maintenance and storage space. I did all of those. Daycare center for affordable housing participants. I didn't have a daycare, but I have worked with somebody that had that. Community building centers, we did that, and college housing. So all of those can be, those are eligible activities. Not allowed any type of economic development services that are not related to affordable housing. Economic development activities not directly related to provision of affordable housing, or activities that are normally funded through tribal programs, BIA roads, social services, education, things like that. Now, you can punch in the road when you're building the project, but you can't just be building roads for the reservation per se. There's rules about how you have to expend that money. You can build a building for your elders, but you can't pay for the staff to run that building the whole time. So whenever you are in doubt, call your HUD office. They're absolutely wonderful about answering your questions. I called them all the time. Activities recaps, you can do rental housing, housing counseling, property management, maintenance for your housing entities' properties, leverage a tax credit product, water and sewer for affordable housing, gym for your affordable housing tenants, services provided by police for your affordable tenants, housing tenants only. Housing related, and I realize that I'm a couple minutes late, and I'm sorry, and you got a survey to do when we get done, but we're almost there. If using income generated from the use of block grant funds, which is called program income, eligible activities are expanded to include housing related activities. Okay, they're defined for purposes of using program income, means any facility, a community building, infrastructure business, program or activity, including any community development activity that is determined by you as a recipient to be beneficial to the provision of housing in an Indian area. So AWISTA did put up your webinar feedback survey if you want to start that while I'm finishing. So your housing related activities have to meet at least one of the conditions that would help the tribe or the TDHE reduce the cost of construction of your Indian housing, would make housing more affordable or energy efficient, accessible, or practicable in your Indian area, or would otherwise advance the purposes of NAHASDA. The requirements do not apply if you are not utilizing block grant funds for that activity. So the summary: block grant funds versus your program income. Block grant funds, funding allocation, interest earned on your invested IHBG funds have to be used for affordable housing activities. All the NAHASDA requirements apply. If it's program income, it is the income generated from the use of your block grant funds, excluding interest earned on invested block grant funds, can be used for affordable housing and affordable housing activities and housing related activities. And NAHASDA requirements do not apply if you're not mingling block grant funds with it. Okay. So determining those housing activities, what does your community need now? What will be needed in the future? What needs can you meet with your current and your future budget? For any activity you choose, what is the benefit and the responsibilities of your participants going to be. Determine how that activity will be implemented, the policies and the procedures you're going to need to put forth that program. Some of your examples: rental, homeowner, rehab, house purchase assistance, rental assistance, and services. So you determine the program type. What type of housing assistance is needed? What type do your tribal members demand? Do we have the capacity to develop that housing? And then do we have the capacity to continue to manage that type of property? Those are your questions. Your allocation approaches is the maximum amount of assistance versus a share smaller, amount to access more households. So am I going to give 10 people $1,000, or am I going to give 20 people $500? How are you going to do it? Is it going to be a one-time assistance, or are you going to allow households to receive assistance over time? Are you going to try to leverage any other program? Is the assistance going to be a grant, or is it going to be a loan? Is it going to be a no interest, market interest, or reduced interest? Are you going to allow sweat equity? Are you going to perhaps loan tools, equipment, provide technical assistance, or what else are you going to offer? How are you going to implement it? How is that work going to be accomplished? Do you have the tribal staff to do that? Are you going to use a construction contract? Is it going to be totally force account? Is it going to be force account with subcontractors? I've done all of those over time. They all have their own advantages and pitfalls. Okay. Are you going to have sub-recipient agreements? Are you going to allow sweat equity? So if it's going to be perhaps the rental housing portion of that, you can develop housing for all types of income eligible families. You can target and develop for certain populations, like I said, elderly, large families, college students, etc. You can develop special needs housing, develop for a specific population. The block grant can only pay for the development, not for those related services to run that program. Mixed income units, you can develop housing for low income and non-low income households. You can only pay for the portion related to your low income households. You can read about that at PIH Notice 2010-32, limiting housing to Indian families, for more information. You can determine the minimum number of units based on your actual cost invested, or it could be a fixed or a floating unit to come up with that cost. And you can do your comparability analysis. Number of bedrooms, square footage of the unit, what type of amenities, the fixtures, the appliances, and other. Determining your minimum number of NAHASDA units in a mixed scenario there. If the units in the project are comparable, you could do a ratio of block grant funds, to your project total cost, the ratio of minimum NAHASDA units to your total project units. If they're not comparable, it might necessitate fixed units, okay? You determine the actual cost of your NAHASDA units, including the share of your common cost out there, to determine that ratio. You can do or build supportive housing, shared eating, and sanitary facilities. That would be typically connected to social services or special needs programs. You can do single room occupancy with shared kitchen or sanitary facilities, or similar to individual apartments. We got people that do tiny homes and things like that. Your eligible rental activities: new construction, rehab of existing units, acquisition with rehab, reconstruction, and conversion. The eligible rental housing cost: relocation, environmental reviews, project oversight, and implementation. You cap cost at your total development cost. You can't exceed that amount, and that does not include your infrastructure beyond your footprint. Be very familiar, if you're doing building, with total development cost and what that actually, breaks down to for your expenses. Your developer and owner options: it could be a tribe, it could be a private developer. You could do a limited partnership, a joint venture, a nonprofit developer. Okay, we are almost there, guys. Your construction method: force account, contractor in combination. And I would like to see if you guys want to end it with A, B, C, or D. Always forced account. You always use contractors. We utilize both, or you are not sure. Okay. If anybody's got any questions, that would be great. You can put them there. Please come back tomorrow. We're going to be here at 2:00. Thank you, Dakota, Brianna. There's my information if you guys ever need me, need anything else. Like I said, I'll try to answer. Like if it was to come through right now, I wouldn't be able to answer because I'm doing this live. Next week I'm in the Pueblos, but I try to always get back and answer my students if they have questions. And there's your webinar survey that's there. Thank you, Donald.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I really appreciate it. You did an incredible job. I'm going to go ahead and reshare the survey. Cheryl does read these. She does greatly appreciate everyone's feedback. She likes to know what you guys would like to see in the future, and if anything, she can touch up on it in the future as well. So here's the feedback survey.
Don't freeze, Linda.
And then, as Cheryl said, please come back tomorrow for day 3. If you missed yesterday's or if you joined a little bit later today, no worries. I'm going to go ahead and put the YouTube link right here so you can actually watch yesterday and today's before tomorrow's to get caught up on everything. Remember that you can find all the course, all the attachments and everything under your courses. So please make sure that you do review those. Cheryl took quite a bit of time making sure everything's updated and perfect for you to use. So please make sure you download those in your courses.
So we still homework.
Like I just explained, you can access any of the webinar recordings on our YouTube channel. Our ones from Adobe are also on there as well. If there's a specific one you're looking for, please feel free to email me and I'd be more than happy to send you the direct link so you don't have to look any further. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We also have a podcast called Hope a Thing, a Native American Podcast, and you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. All right, that's all I have for everyone today. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to come back for day 3. Thank you again, Cheryl.
No worries. See you guys.
You are currently the only person in this conference.